So I have a lot of problems with the Recognition Act, basically because it is provincial legislation. And I guess I should have put in there, what about the federal government? Where is the federal government in this whole deal, you know? And I think it's something that we really need to look at. And because the scope, the content, scope, and principles, context, scope, and principles are so narrow, they basically really hinge on limiting the rights of recognition itself, because you need to consider recognition is going to be only done within that scope. And then you have the Indigenous Nation Commission. I really do not feel that the province should have any jurisdiction at all, or any kind of recognition in terms of defining who we are as a Secwepemc nation. I think it would be very wrong for them to have anything to say in that. And the real problem I have with this in terms of provincial legislation is cases where you see the province saying, you know, the BC treaty process is an alternative to negotiate, you know, these issues. And I know in one case, one group, they got, and it was Taka River or something, they got involved in the provincial environmental assessment process, and they voluntarily jumped into it. And that the courts turned around in the end and said you can't use title as an excuse because you voluntarily agreed to the process. And to a certain extent, when you start saying that the province can help us define what our nations are, we're sort of tipping our hand and giving them the nod that they have that authority. And the courts will use that, and they'll fight against us. The other thing that I feel is really wrong, and I put that very much in the paper, is that this is really not recognition of Aboriginal title itself and your rights to the land. What it is legislation that recognizes 3 different engagement processes. So if you want to have comprehensive shared agreements for your whole territory, then you need to get involved in this comprehensive engagement, which means all 17 bands will have to get together. We'd have to prove that we are the rightful holders of the title to the land, and then we would then go through a negotiating process that's defined partly by the province and have them approve whether or not we are eligible to be under this comprehensive project. And I just showed you before under the VCTC that it cost them $345.6 million. How many $1 million is it going to cost us to get to this comprehensive negotiating status? You know, that hasn't been answered. And the same with the interim and the default processes. So they're really agreeing they're not really agreeing to recognize us per se. What they're doing is that we're agreeing to get involved in 3 engagement processes that will maybe or maybe not come to some form of recognition. The benefits are this shared decision making and revenue and benefit sharing agreements. Those are going to be what they're trying to get us to agree to. And like I was a chief in Masconlith for 8 years. Judy Wilson's now the present chief, and I know it's really tough to really talk to the people about jobs and employment and all these kinds of things. And I can really appreciate, nobody can argue against the fact that there shouldn't be these kinds of shared decision making. But you need to really understand what are the principles and what are the things that you're going to give up in that process, and who are you dealing with. So the Recognition Act continued. It talks about the Council of Indigenous Nations, which I suppose may or may not be some kind of advisory board to the province. The dispute resolutions, proclamation, and the ratification and instructions. And one of the questions I asked is, do First Nation organizations have the mandate to be able to ratify this process? I think it basically belongs to the rightful landholders to make that decision, because it's a real fundamental change, I think, in the constitutional framework of this country. And there's really no question about the cost of this, especially vis-a-vis the 345 million before. And so the AFN and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the First Nations Summit have sort of, in talking about the British Columbia Treaty process, told CERD, which is the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, they said in 1970 that Canada refuses to negotiate treaties based on recognition of Aboriginal rights and title. Instead, it brings a long list of fixed bottom line positions to the table. If First Nations want a treaty, they have to agree. Canada refuses to allow First Nations to hold treaty lands as Aboriginal title lands. The land must be held as private fee simple lands under provincial government jurisdiction. There is no room to negotiate. And that is their position. There's no and, ifs, and buts. The feds still have that position, and until you really are able to break the door down with the federal government, because the federal government has to pay for a lot of the recognition issues. Like, these companies, when you take timber away from them, they expect to be compensated. And there's no way the province is going to compensate them alone. The feds themselves will have to come up because they've got a bigger and deeper purse in order to deal with this. And so we need to be very careful about that part. One of the things I just want to point out here is that I did write a report, and people want it, you can ask me for it, and I can email it to you, or send it to give it to the band office or something. But this is a report where I took all of the different treaties, agreements, and principles, and I put them together as a document, and I gave it to the Special Rapporteur, United Nations Special Rapporteur. It talks about the application of the Constitution of Canada, and it's all the way across. Nishka, Tawasin, Yale, Lidley, Dene, Yalkachi, Slamion, Manalf, all of them right across. They all have these exactly identical same wordings with regard to Aboriginal title, but these are the ones that I was telling you about. In there, but they're listed in there fairly clearly, in their identical wording. So these guys have a very consistent strategy. It's not like they're making this up as they go along, and you need to be very, very skeptical at that point in time.